From a professional soccer career to becoming a driving force in the mortgage industry, Brian Covey has shown what it takes to find your competitive edge. Get off the sidelines and get in the game. Find your competitive edge with Brian Covey.
Okay, welcome back to another edition of Finding Your Competitive Edge. Guys, today you're going to want to get a pen and paper out. Because for all of you, whether you're a coach, you're an author, you're a speaker, you actually just work with high school kids. Many of you are parents. It doesn't matter where you are. Leadership, and as I look at how we lead ourselves, is the most important thing we can do so that we can lead others effectively today. So I'm excited because guests like this, I get to learn from, you're going to get to learn from as well. And we're going to be covering everything, not only leadership, emotional intelligence, resiliency, all of these things, but really with over 25 years experience. Our guest today, Whitney Breer, is an author. She's a speaker. She's a coach. She does all these things. But she really specializes in this organizational leadership development. And what I think of as I've gone through my 22 years of leadership, I had some great mentors. I had some great managers and leaders. But the reality is I had to learn a lot of things the hard way. And so today, what we want to help you is, how do we help you accelerate your learning, become a great leader wherever you are, and learn some of the things that took us 2 decades to learn, and really share those with you so you can move forward and help and serve at the highest levels today. So Whitney, I'm excited to have you on, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. Greetings from Germany.
I was going to say, so you might be our first guest from Germany, which is really cool. We've had some people not in the US and they were there, but you were originally in the US. You were telling me you've been in Germany for over 25 years.
Yeah.
Let's start there a little bit. So how did you get there? A little bit of your backstory so people can get to know you.
Well, I was born in the U.S. I was raised in Florida, in Pensacola, Florida, and raised there and studied at NC State and went on to graduate school in Virginia. And after all my studies, I decided I need to get at least 1 or 2 years of international experience to kind of pep up my resume. You know, I thought it would look good to say that I had lived in at least one other country before applying and studying, maybe to get my PhD. So I went abroad and lived in Japan for a couple of years, but I'm 5'11" and I was way too tall for that country. Couldn't buy any shoes for 3 years, had withdrawal symptoms. And then I moved to Germany where the people are a lot taller. And I wound up staying there. And I have been here now for 25 years. It has nothing to do with the height of the people. I've just fallen in love with this country and fallen in love with living in Europe. Although I guess my heart is kind of split. Half of it has a U.S. flag on it. The other half has kind of a German flag on it.
I love that. Well, we keep up with Germany because of soccer, right? And we've been watching for years. And so when I think about Germany, that's the first thing I think about there. But I'm always curious, with 25 years over there, what are a couple of the biggest differences you've seen and in your space, right? So, you know, outside of like the cultural things and all that there, but is there any difference around leadership and how we view that maybe in the United States versus in Germany, and some of your research and just on the ground living there?
I wouldn't say one style of leadership is better than the other. I think they're very, very unique. They do have some overlap. I believe a lot of it is based, if I go back one step, to the U.S. kind of hire and fire policy. It's much easier to get rid of bad employees than it is here in Germany. In Germany, you have a 3-month period of notice, at least 3 months. Leaders have up to 6 months, even longer, if they want to quit or if they're going to be fired. It works both ways. So it's harder to get rid of people. And often this sounds really bad, but over here, people are protected. They just can't walk off the job. So leaders do have some kind of, I guess, a sense of security in a way that you come to work today and everybody's still going to be there. Yeah. I've worked with companies in the U.S. where people, it's at will, right? It's called employment at will, and they can just walk off if they're dissatisfied. And it's hard that way, because sometimes I've seen in the U.S., I work a lot in the U.S. with international companies, people just getting up and leaving. You know, so I think people lead differently too. But I think people are very, very similar. Germans are very, very frugal when it comes to feedback, positive feedback. They don't smile a lot. They don't have a lot of positive vibes. They take things a bit more seriously. In the U.S., I see a little bit more, I don't know, relaxed is maybe the right word, and a bit more informal relationships, the way people talk to each other.
Yeah.
So good or bad, right or wrong, it's just different.
Yep. And it's good to, I think, just to take a step back and think about those things, because we get so focused on our little microcosm of where we live and our company or where we are. And I think back to one of my soccer coaches was German, and he had moved over here, this family and all that. And he was a very different, very important in my development, very regimented, very fitness oriented, and it was very structured. And I think back, I was like, I'm really thankful that I had someone like that pushed it along. And that kind of leads me to, I think about your book, right? So I'm looking at this, leadership starts with you. And I've said that before, but you've dug into this. Let's talk about what the concept is, and leadership starts with you. Where did that come from? And a little bit about the book, because I believe that. Like, I think about it. If I don't lead myself, I am probably not effectively leading anyone else in my world, right?
Yeah. Well, about the book itself, the book is a business novel. It's not a book where you're going to pick up and find charts and tables of management theory to tell you how to lead people or lead yourself. It's a story. I chose a woman. I guess I can identify with women who likes coffee. It was a story about a woman who was in line, or is in line, to become CEO of a family-owned company, a small, mid-sized, growing rapidly company in the US. And her father kind of pulls the plug on that at the last minute, says, "You're not ready." And she gets furious. She's kind of a alpha. And she says, "Why not?" He says, "You have the IQ, you don't have the EQ yet. And I just can't hand over this company. This company is not just a head count. It also has heart counts. It's got people behind those numbers. And until you learn to lead people, and people actually want to follow you, you're not fit to take over this company." So he sends her on a trip around the world where she visits 5 or 6 handful of different mentors and leaders and colleagues he's had in his career that shape and influence her and kind of open her eyes and trigger self-reflection into the emotional intelligence part of leading people.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you mentioned EQ and that it's a novel, because I ordered the book and I'm excited to dig into it. I didn't want to give too much away so people read it, but I love that you said, okay, it's not your typical, hey, here are the 5 things that a great leader does. And like, it's really beautiful that you can actually have a story. And I think for a lot of us, like, I can think back to when I was up for a promotion or opportunity and I didn't get it and got that feedback, whether it was, hey, your EQ's not here. Hey, your organizational piece is not here. You're not strategically thinking, at the level we want, whatever it is. I would love to get your input on this. Is when people talk about EQ, I think it's a lot of times confused. I would love your take on that, because you're the expert. You've studied a lot of this. What is EQ? How can we develop it? And why is it even important? Why are we even talking about it?
Well, I don't want to downplay IQ. So nice. I compare IQ and EQ to a bird that flies with 2 wings. And this bird would be in really big trouble if it took off with 1 wing. It was only flying with strategy, numbers, data, and goals. That's the IQ part. Highly intelligent. The bird would take off, but wouldn't get very far. It would go around in circles. And the same is true for the other wing, and that's the EQ. Emotional intelligence is the people side of leadership. It's about empathy. And empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for people, and empathy is being able to put yourself in their shoes without sucking in all those emotions and trying to see their perspective and see where they're coming from and feed back what you're picking up on. But it doesn't mean you feel that way. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. But it does mean that you connect with them on a human basis. And it's kind of this leader as coach, where you begin to, instead of tell and do as I say, it's more of a listen and ask questions approach. Mm-hmm. And I think that leadership excellence needs both. Of course, you need strategy and numbers and data, and you need all of this. And that's kind of like project management. You've got to have that, or you're not going to be successful. But that's all that you focus on, and you forget the people, you're in big trouble. And, I grew up half my childhood, when I entered the 5th grade, I moved to North Carolina. My dad's job took us there. And this is probably a shock for younger generations, but at that time, back in the mid 1980s, you got your driver's license 16, and with good driving record and recommendations from the school, you could get a license to drive a school bus, these big yellow school buses, at 17. Now, I think that they have stopped doing that, but you had to go through safety training, psychological. So I equivalent, it's a lot about driving this bus. And I see a lot of leaders driving this kind of big yellow school bus. And they have this route that they're on, and they charge ahead. They know they know the final destinations. But when they get there, they turn around the bus and it's empty. There's nobody on the bus. And like, oh, well, I reached my target on time, but nobody's on board. I'm thinking, yeah, well, dude, stop at the stop and pick people up. You got to open the door and invite them into your bus. So when I'm doing these kind of trainings, I go, you're the bus driver, you're at the helm, you're leading it, you're driving, you're steering it through traffic jams, through potholes, through obstacles and whatever. But if you don't stop and open the door and invite people on the bus, you're not going to get your followers, and you're not going to be able to reach your goal. You'll reach your goal perhaps on paper, but it won't be a sustainable change. So it's kind of like driving a bus.
I love that. I think about one of my favorite authors, and I got to see a couple weeks ago, is John Gordon, the energy bus. Yeah. I couldn't help but think about that, and how many leaders, and what a visual to think about. You're driving this bus, nobody's on there with you. You get to your destination. I love the way you said that, is how many times do we get to a goal, but yet we've alienated so many people on the team, and the way in which we got there, you just have no one with us. And so to repeat that success over and over is really hard for leaders. And I think about my own journey. I'd love your take on this. Is for a lot of leaders, they really haven't had those great mentors, and they're just learning as they go. And then they end up going to another company because they think, oh, it was the company that wasn't performing right, and the same cycle repeats. What are some ways people can engage in mentorship? Because I think that's a big one. And what do you look for in a mentor as you're on that journey?
I think it's interesting. It's kind of weird you're asking. I was talking to my husband last night. He retired early last year from a global pharmaceutical company here in Germany, and we were at a party last weekend where he saw one of his first mentors. And I said, wow, on the drive home, I said, what drew you to him? What did you like so much about him? And he said, well, he listened, and he didn't just deal out advice. Occasionally he did, but mentoring is not giving advice. It's listening to people, and it's almost like this role as a coach where you begin to ask questions. He said, but among everything, he set the standards that he wanted people to follow. He walked his talk. And there's nothing worse than leaders who list all the things they want people to do, but don't actually do it themselves. And he said, and I agree, he said, when I look for a mentor, I look for a role model, someone who walks their talk, who has courage to stick to tough decisions. He said, leadership is hard. It's not a popularity contest. You want to support your employees, but it's not a popularity contest. And sometimes that comes with a paycheck, is making unpopular, really, really hard decisions. And he said, I look for someone that I can look up to. I can say, this person is better than me, and I strive to not be them, but be like them and follow in their footsteps. So I think it's someone that you look up to, that you can learn something from.
I love that definition. I'm glad you clarified, because so many times people are, oh, I need a coach or a mentor. And I'm like, which one? You might actually need both. And I have both in my life, I'll just say, and for very different reasons. And I love the way you said the mentor, because my coach actually coaches me. Like, I bring in situational pieces. I need help with this. I can go this way, I can go that way. Like, give me some feedback. It's very much back and forth. And while they're listening, most of the work is on me. And he'll leave me with, hey, this week, this is your practice areas. Whereas the mentor, when you said that, it really clicked, because the best mentors, I thought about this, Whitney, they were absolutely the best listeners.
Right.
Without fail.
Absolutely.
I'd love for you to talk about that, because I wrote something yesterday about active listening. And it's interesting how this is kind of aligning up there. Can people learn to become a better listener? And what does that look like for someone that's going, well, I want to be a better listener, but my mind goes here, it goes there, and I'm struggling with being a great listener today. Are there practical ways and things that they can do to become a better listener?
You can learn it. I do think it's very challenging, and it's a technique that's called intentional listening. And intentional listening came from the study on psychological safety that was done in this big Google study in 2017. And the number one success factor of all these teams they studied at Google was psychological safety. And that is really, in a team setting, people feeling safe to speak up, voice their opinion, have a contra opinion, and they don't feel they're going to be mocked or laughed at, or they're going to get into trouble later down the road with their boss, have a bad evaluation, or their colleagues will talk about it behind their backs. And one of the things that came from that is in the meetings they observed of teams that had high psychological safety with leaders who did it was something they called intentional listening. And this means that there was no phone in their hands. They weren't staring at laptops. There were no sidebar conversations, and that's all visible. But what's invisible is what's going on in your mind. You're not coming up with counter arguments. Sometimes I work as a coach in teams, and I see someone discussing or explaining what he or she thinks is the right, whatever approach. And I see people just kind of waiting on the edge of their seats, because as soon as they finish their sentence, they jump in with like a counter argument. I think you're not listening. You're already formulating the arguments in your head about why you're right and they're wrong. So can I turn off this inner dialogue, this chatter in my head, and just listen for the sake of listening, and shut off all these counter arguments and why I think they're wrong and all this judging? It's tough, and it takes conscious training to do that. Especially if we don't like someone. Especially if there's someone on the team that we don't resonate or vibe with. It's really hard to just unstick that label and just listen.
Hey guys, it's Brian here. I hope you are enjoying the show. By the way, if you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur looking to grow your personal brand, make a bigger impact, maybe increase your leads and grow your revenue, let's help you get started today by connecting up with my friends over at the Brand Builders Group. You've heard me talk about them, but if you're new here, this is definitely the first step to get you started in turning your reputation into revenue. Head over to freebrandcall.com/Brian Covey. Again, to set up your free brand call, go to freebrandcall.com/Brian Covey to set up a free strategy call with one of the team at Brand Builders, and they will dive into your specific goals for how you want to grow your personal brand. I can't wait to hear how it goes. You know what I learned is starting the podcast a few years ago is one of the kind of ancillary benefits that I did not see coming was I was struggling as a listener. I'd had that feedback, and it was really something I was working on. And little did I know, being a guest and then also hosting your own podcast put you in situations every week when you do those that you're forced to listen, and you're forced to get better, because if you don't, your guests will know, your audience will know, and they'll be like, man, you were over here, you were over there, like the conversation didn't flow. And I started to study. And what's really interesting on those, Whitney, I would listen to people that I had admired and looked up to, and I started to be able to tell which ones were, as you said, intentionally listening.
Yeah.
And which ones were like, I got to get my next point across. This is where the show's going. These are my questions. Yeah. And I thought about that when you were sharing that, because I thought, man, that was 3 years of working and still looking for improvement. What do you think about when people are going to meetings? I was always taught take notes, right? So you may see me occasionally, I'll jot down a note. What do you think about that to help listening, or when you're in these situations, how important is it for people to take notes and to be engaged in that? Is that part of the process?
I think it's great. And the argument often comes, I see people with their laptops out in meetings they say they're taking notes. And I believe they're taking notes. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But the clicking on the keyboard, rouses a lot of suspicion in their colleagues as, are you really just taking notes, or are you answering those emails that need to be taken care of? So it's tough, and there's no clear decision. The jury is out on this one. When I take notes, I mean, I'm very old school, so maybe I'm too old fashioned. I really bring in my spiral notebook, and I say, I'm just going to jot down a couple of things because what you're saying is really important to me. And I might come back with that and just say, so if I've understood you correctly, and I'll begin to ask questions. And it's something I think I talk about, it's in the book as well, but it's something called the assertiveness ratio. It's in teams of high performing teams. And studies show they have a 1-to-1 ratio. For every question that's asked, there is an I statement, like I believe, I think, or I want to, I'm of the opinion. And what that shows is that there's safety in the team for people to speak up and voice their opinion. At the same time, there's an equal amount of asking questions. And these questions show a degree of humility, like I don't know everything. Share with me what you know. It shows a degree of vulnerability because you're admitting you don't know everything, which would be great for leaders to do. And it shows curiosity and interest. It shows respect for what they're saying. So this 1-to-1 is a nice ratio to aim for. That's what I listen for when I go in and listen to meetings and get to eavesdrop on them.
I love that. And the way that you bring that in, though, I think for a lot of people, once you're aware of a concept or something that works, and I'm always looking for, okay, what are the top performing leaders doing? What are the top performing, we call them high performing teams, the elite teams? What are they doing, right? Because when you shared that, I'll talk about Simon Sinek, always talks about creating that emotional safety and the best teams, and whether it's the SEALs or different ones he uses, they do have that freedom to share as they go through. If a leader is listening today and they're like, okay, Whitney, I love this. Our team today is not there. There's not emotional safety. And I know you deal with conflict. You're brought in a lot of times to kind of unravel some of the things that need to be. What should that leader start doing today if they're listening and they realize, hey, our team's probably not at that level? We're not there yet.
I guess I would do it in 2 phases, at least 2. I don't think it's wise for a leader to come in and say, look, I got this great book, and it says that the teams that do this and this and this and this happens. So I think for a while, it could be weeks, maybe a couple of months, a leader needs to model the behavior that he or she expects or wants to see in the team. This means showing vulnerability, showing they make mistakes, showing admitting mistakes, and showing how they learn from them. Listening, asking questions, and stopping people from interrupting others or cutting them off. So kind of, I would say policing is the right word, but monitoring that behavior and walking that talk for a while. And then what I also say, take this kind of Columbo approach. Now, my sons are too young to know who Columbo is, but maybe my generation would know. Columbo always knew who did it, right? In his shows, he'd come in all his wrinkled overcoat and come in and look very naive. But I say, do the Columbo approach. I say, guys, I was reading this article about this, and I thought it was really interesting. Let me share it with you. What do you think? And not just say, I want to do this. And the leaders I know who have done this, I've never seen a team who said, oh, no, we don't want psychological safety in our team. We want to keep this toxic culture and just leave it as it is. I've never seen that, except the people leading the toxic culture. Then they have a problem because they're going to be called on their behavior, but that's a different conversation. So I would say bring it up. In fact, I did this a couple weeks ago at a team here in Germany in Frankfurt. And I said, would you like to try something out? And one of the things of this experiment is these high performing teams not only have the same ratio of questions to I statements, they have something called a 6-to-1 positivity ratio. This means there are 6 positive, supportive statements, like just a simple thank you, or, oh, I didn't know that, that's interesting. These phrases for every kind of, oh, that's not going to work, a critique. So let's do a brainstorm. There are 18 people divided into, I think, 5 teams or something. I gave them a big piece of flip chart paper, and I said, you got 10 minutes in your small groups to write down all the positive things you can think of that might be said in a meeting. At the end, we rotated around, and of these 18 people in these small groups, there are only 3 phrases that actually were duplicated. Every single paper had at least like 18, 20 unique examples. This is in German, so it's doable in German. It can be done in English as well, but it was an eye opener for them, because a lot of times people get very, oh no, and I got to talk about positives more. You can say thank you the whole time. That's so fake. Let's try it out. What can you say? And we had several hundred examples of supportive, appreciative, uplifting kind of terms or phrases or questions. At the end, they were amazed. They said, this is easy. I said, right, just use it.
Isn't that something to think about too? I mean, the amount that they were able to come up with when that was the focus task, and then to realize there was very little overlap, if any, at the few statements.
Three phrases of several hundred, and it was like a danke, like a thank you, or I appreciate that, or good idea. So these like three basics. Everything else was very unique. It's so easy to say something supportive and positive in a meeting, and it really lifts the spirit in the meeting and makes people feel safe.
Do you think people struggle with that, sharing their positive comments because they've just never seen it modeled, or are they resisting that or not able to do it for some other reason?
I think what I see in the US is very often a very kind of, I'm not sure, it's hard to tell. What I see in the US is this kind of awesome, yeah, super, great idea, cool, man. And I think how authentic or how genuine is that? Can you really give more specific feedback? I mean, this awesome is kind of this is the German cliche of Americans. Again, every time you want to say, what do Americans say? Awesome, dude. And that's how Germans kind of mock the US. I'm sure that Americans have a lot of jokes about Germans, but that's their awesome, dude. And I think, yeah, well, can you say something else to say that's a really great idea, or that's interesting, Susan? Tell us more about what you think. Can you dig a little bit deeper and really show that you mean it instead of just an awesome or great or whatever?
Oh, wow. And I think too, people are like, well, if I'm too overly positive and this, that, and they're battling being positive versus a realist and all this stuff. And it's like, we talked about this the other day with commenting on social media, how you can help support people and you can add, but people just drop a one word, like you said, like awesome, cool. And we started this experiment a few years ago and it's worked exceptionally well. I'll give the tip to everybody here is I started to speak. I would hold down the microphone and actually give a compliment and something back as if I was saying it, because it'll just transcribe it when you hit the microphone. And so comments would stand out. Things were really, for me, starting to connect, because they go, if I drop comments on, your social, you're going, man, Brian's on my social and he's just dropping these comments. And I got to think the same would be true if you're doing that verbally. If you see people in the office, you're in these meetings, if you don't just give them the 1 or 2 word answers, you actually slow down to give feedback. And you said that, and I've heard this a few times, but what do you think is really meaningful feedback in context? Like, we're in these meetings, we're sharing ideas, we're going through things. How can a leader or someone in those really engage in meaningful feedback?
I think it's more than just an awesome or a great idea. I think it's also asking a question that shows that you're interested in hearing more, and the tone of your voice is decisive. And I like to say that's a really interesting point. I've never thought about that before. Can you tell me more about ... Or that's really interesting. Can you share more of your insights? Because there's always a reason behind why somebody believes what they do. I mean, they usually have a pretty good reason. So can I find out more about their thinking to understand their point of view? I mean, the more I ask specific questions, the more it shows I'm really listening to what they have to say. Yeah, there's actually a proverb in German that rhymes in German, it doesn't rhyme in English. It says, he who asks leads. So it can't translate this really well, but it means the more you ask questions, the more you actually lead the conversation and you lead people that way.
Isn't that, yeah. And I find that to be true, because the person that's talking the most is giving the most information, while the one that's asking the question is receiving and learning, okay, where do we go with this? Where do we go with that? And So I love this because active listening, I think people are going through like tons of takeaways and actionable items. As you look at, and I would love to get your take on this one, Whitney, is great leaders today, are there characteristics you look for? Are there things that you've studied and said, okay, these are, in all great leaders, these are some of the things that they do so that people that are listening, they can kind of hone in on what that looks like?
That's a big question. How do I answer that one? I believe that great leaders have a keen sense of why they do what they do. They have this famous purpose. I know purpose has been talked about and talked over, but there's a reason, it's a contribution greater than themselves, and they find meaning in what they do. And when they do that, it's also a source of inspiration for their employees. They are able to see strengths in people and spot them and build on them instead of just honing in on the negative. For me, I believe that great leaders are very aware of their energy. And I don't mean this in a esoteric kind of way. There's something called emotional contagion. And studies show too that people can instill their energy, whether it's good or bad, in others within about 30 seconds. And usually it's the person in the room with the most power. Hopefully it's the leader. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the bad apple of the group, the toxic person who's manipulating and exerting power over the team. Most of the time, I hope it's the leader. And I actually have a sign on my door outside that says, take responsibility for the energy you bring into this room. It doesn't mean you can't come in and you can't have a bad day, but don't dump it on me. And I've seen people dump their negative days on other people. And I think, don't do that. Nobody wants it. Just work on it. So they kind of are very conscious of their energy. They have a growth mindset. They learn from setbacks. Of course, setbacks are frustrating. Nobody wants to fail is maybe the right word, but I mean, to look from and say, all right, it was an opportunity for growth. Just brush yourself off, put your crown back on, and keep on going. And I think these kind of things are what I look for, but it's people who walk their talk and really show they care about the people they lead.
Well, I love those. And before we started, we talked about resiliency. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to get your take how that plays in, because last week we did this mental toughness forum. And as I listened to all the speakers, if you were to take this through line, resiliency was it. Whether they said the word, which many of them did, or they said it in some other way. And I thought, isn't that interesting that we brought that up earlier? So how does that play into leadership in today really being a key trait, and one I look for in people now?
Well, maybe just to go back in time, the word resiliency wasn't actually used for human beings until about the year 1995. Before that, and I studied at NC State, I worked a lot in the labs, I have a degree in science, and we often tested materials in the lab for resiliency. And companies sent in Columbia is this outdoor company. We got all kinds of outdoor company materials, jackets, shoes, tents, whatever. We tested all these materials for resiliency. We test even today, metals, wood, building materials are all tested for their ability to withstand outside conditions, heat, humidity, hurricanes, I'm from Florida, whatever, pressure. And in resiliency in the lab, you test something until it breaks. So you want to know what the degree of resiliency is. And it wasn't used until 1995 when there was a study released, a woman in Hawaii who had studied about 300 kids who had grown up in, what's it called? Not foster care, in group homes. At that time, at foster, they had group homes. She wanted to know what would become of them from their life. What would happen to them? All of them were put into these group homes, so they were 2 or 3 years old. Their parents were on drugs, there was weapons, poverty, whatever. There was enough reason for the state of Hawaii to step in and take them out and put them into these homes. And she wanted to know, Emmy Werner was her name, what would happen to these kids? And she studied them for 40 years, and a third of them turned out to be resilient. And that's when she released this article in 1995, talked about these resilient children on the island of Hawaii. And that was an eye-opener. And this is when positive psychology kicked in, and all these people began to move away from just material science to people. So it's our ability to withstand outside conditions, whether it is a COVID pandemic or the organization being, reorganized. Is it financial pressure? Is it marital pressure? What's going on in your life exerting pressure on you? And how do you deal with that in a healthy way? How can you grow from that? So I believe absolutely that resiliency is a key aspect for leaders. They have to lead their employees through ambiguity, through volatile times of uncertainty, especially with COVID, the lockdown, home office, hybrid working, all this stuff. And they had to be the role model for that. So absolutely. Yeah. So that was a long answer, I'm sorry, but I just think the roots of it are really important. It came actually from the lab for material science.
That is so cool. So I've never heard that before, which is awesome. That's a first. And so many people throw that word around, and it's really cool to go back to the roots of it. Where did it come from? Because I'm always just curious, like when did we start using that? And to think it was only 1995. That wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't that long ago. There's actually a company in Florida. They've taken about 8 football fields. I can't remember their name, and they opened up 8 football fields, and companies actually pay them to put all the material out there and expose them to the elements. I mean, can you imagine like buying up 8 football fields of land and making a fortune because people stuff it? They want to know really what happens with humidity, wind, rain, heat, sunlight, UV light on paints and material and wood, and they earn a fortune by doing resiliency tests due to the Florida humidity. That's a unique business opportunity, isn't it?
It is, and it just tells you when you look at the outdoor equipment, and we're into a lot of that stuff, like how much testing it goes through. Yeah. And it gets me thinking about this. I would love your take on this one, Whitney. So if they're testing equipment out there like that, how can we test leaders today, and how can we grow and strengthen our own resiliency?
I think when I do a lot of resiliency trainings, and resiliency is based on, I usually use 7 factors of resiliency, and one of them is called realistic optimism. Am I able to maintain my optimism, but also kind of I need to be realistic about the challenges we're facing. There's the idea of acceptance. Can I let go of the things that I cannot control, so I focus on the things that I can control? So can I just let go of things? How do I learn that? It's also the idea of self-determination and autonomy and being responsible for your actions. Yeah, the words that come out of your mouth, your actions, what you do and what you say, it's up to you. Your social network, there's this famous phrase, I'm sure you know it, you're the average of 5, right? You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Are they toxic? Or are they good for you? Do you have, for example, the ability to, it's called future orientation. Are you future oriented? Do you have goals? People who have goals have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Mm-hmm. So, I did some math the other day with a friend of mine, and the average life expectancy in the Western world is now 80 years. Yeah. 76 for men and about 83, 84 for women. Let's take 80. 80 years means that we have, and I did the math, we have 29,200 days on this earth, on average. And this means that we have 700,000 hours. 33 of those years are spent sleeping. So average, we sleep from our 80 years, we sleep on average 33 years. Good, depending on the number of kids you have, it might be less, but right. Average, this means that we have 500,000 active hours on the face of this earth. So the question is, what are you doing with those active hours? Someone said to me, they said, life is like a roulette wheel, and we're all gamblers in the metaphorical sense of it. We all stand on this roulette wheel of life. The only rule of the game is every hour we have to put in one of our chips. We have 500,000 chips to play. So how are you playing your chips? Are you spending your time complaining about a lot of things you can't change anyway? Are you spending your time with toxic people who don't lift you up, but instead tear you down? Are you complaining, worrying about things, and your glass is always half empty? And someone said recently, they said, it doesn't matter if your glass is half empty or half full. The main thing is you know how to refill it. So what are you doing with your 500,000 chips, knowing that every hour you lose one of them? How do you play your chips in life? And that will determine your ultimate success, I believe. That's a bit deep. But I think about it,
I can tell. And the fact that you've studied it and it gave me a visual of, every day you're given a certain amount of chips, potentially, right? And how are you spending those? And I think as leaders, as a dad and husband, all that, like, where am I spending my chips? How am I investing those wisely? And this has been fascinating. You've got me thinking, and I love. So I wanted to have you on here is because I think these unique perspectives of people that come on and share, and whether it's a study about resiliency and where it came from, or understanding how to be. I wrote down this intentional listening. Like, how cool is that going to be? And modeling behavior and all of this as we all set on our journey to become better leaders, better versions of ourselves. What a great way to reflect on this and do that assessment of where am I and where would I like to be in the short time we have.
How do you play your chips? You got 500,000 of them, more or less. Do you spend it staring at your phone, or do you spend it talking to your kids, or do you spend it working out, or do you spend it doing some serious couch surfing, which now and then is not a bad thing, but how are you playing your chips? And that will determine your self-actualization and fulfilling your purpose in life, right?
Oh, well, I know we could jam for hours because this is the stuff that I love learning. And a lot of us, I know a lot of our listeners really will appreciate this because the way that you broke these things down, hopefully they'll grab your book, Leadership Starts With You, and realize it's not just another self-help book, but to actually read a story that we probably find a lot of our own journey that will match up and know that we're not done yet. If you're listening to this, you're not done yet.
That's
so
right.
What if, Whitney, I always love this question. What is anything or something that we didn't cover that you would love to leave the listeners with before we wrap?
I really think we've covered it. I would just say, how you play your chips is totally up to you. Nobody plays that game for you. There is no must or have to in life. The only thing we have to do one day is die. Everything else is a decision. And every decision has consequences, good or bad. But I play my chips and I decide, knowing that each one I play has a consequence for me or my family. I have children, my husband, my health, my job, etc. So it's all up to me.
I love that. How you play your chips matters. Well, thank you for investing in the group. I know they're going to want more information because we just probably scratched the surface of everything that I know that you're able to share and help people with. Where can they find you on social and the best way to connect with you?
Probably the best place is my website. It's www.whitneybreer.com. Hashtag is Instagram is Whitney Breer Official. But I think the website is probably the best. It has my podcast on it, a lot about the book. It has some videos and some free downloads and some free material as well.
Love it. Well, we will include the links. This has been a true honor. Thank you for sharing and pouring in, because I always tell everybody, selfishly, when I started the podcast, I didn't realize this, but it became having great people on and great conversations and dialogue. This is one of the best ways that we can all learn, make ourselves better, and then go take that information. Anything you learned today, take it back to your team, especially if you're a leader. And we always ask this, if something's resonated with you, drop us a comment, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so that we know this has reached you and this made some type of difference or impact in your life. That's why we do it, is these are free information. Basically, we're passing on to you that our hope, and I know Whitney's too, is that we're able to inspire and motivate and really equip you to become the best version of yourself. The world needs more leaders that show up and take a stand. And I'm going to remember that playing your chips every day matters. So Whitney, thank you very much for being an amazing guest. And I can't wait to listen back to this one.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Guys, this has been another episode of Finding Your Competitive Edge. Again, make sure you leave us a review, leave us a comment, let us know how we're doing there. If you haven't grabbed your copy of Conversations with Covey, make sure you go on Amazon and buy that. We are here to help you guys. Drop us a comment. Let us know how we can serve you best. We'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.